I'm really excited to actually be here doing this presentation with you today. And one of the reasons that I ended up um, putting together this outline was because Thomas Gadot at Scribe mentioned how he will be interested in seeing if I had something to offer to Medium Day. He also knows that I'm a storyteller and performer on the side, as long as with um, hold on, hello. Just making sure that everybody can hear me. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Um, I didn't start my writing journey as an essayist. I actually really wanted to be a novelist, but once I joined Medium, I started to get invited to uh, write first person essays, and slowly that developed into having an interest for storytelling and putting together monologues, and something that I do often on the side. Hello, Marilyn. um, I really believe in the importance of first person essays. I think there's a lot of research now talking about how people that read fiction tend to develop their empathy. There's still a little bit of debate of whether or not uh, maybe it's a self-selection bias. People that are already empathetic really enjoy reading fiction. Didn't see much on the issue of memoirs of or first person, but hi Thomas. But imagine that all the first person essays, that how much access you have to experiences that are not your own. And I have just most essays or first person essays really like David Sedaris. There's a lot of things that I don't share with David Sedaris, but I can still read his stories, laugh, and take part of an experience that is not mine. So I'm just gonna jump right into it. The idea today will be that I will try to write something on the fly, and let's see how that goes. Um, Hey, Christopher. For some reason, most people can see me and hear me. Not really sure. Not really sure if it seems like that's something on your end. Um, okay, so I tend to think when I'm approaching stories on things that have happened to me, um, I think of stories in three different ways. So I have stories that are neatly packaged, and you will have them too. And these are stories that have a clear beginning, middle, and end. I have a story that I wrote about a dinner that I had in Chicago, and the beginning was, where when we decided to go to a restaurant, and um, thank you, Bob. Then the middle is when we were having dinner, and then the end is when we got the check. Now, the two other ones are what I think most creative tend to have problems, and it is what I've called the opposite of writer's block. I don't think that a lot of creative, like the ones that are here in this conversation, they don't. It's not like they don't know what to say. Is that sometimes it's hard to get through the resistance when you have so much to say, and one of them is background rich, and that's when the story, there's a nugget in the middle of the story, but for your audience or for your reader to understand what is happening in that story, you have to go back and start explaining that. And then the second one is thematic, which happens a lot with prompts. Sometimes you'll get prompts and you think you have a couple of ideas about it, but you don't have a full story. And you can put an essay together on that if you start mining for snippets of your life. So that one way that I tend to approach that to overcome that resistance is something that I learned when I used to compete in college in an event called impromptu speaking. Now, impromptu speaking, you walk into a room, you're handed a quotation, you develop a thesis, and then you have 2 minutes to prepare a 5 minute speech. And if you've never done this, it might look intimidating to just show up and speak for 5 minutes. But it is not that intimidating because there's just a structure that you follow. And that structure is very similar to the structure of opinion pieces. You have an attention getter, you have a thesis, you have 3 points or 3 paragraphs supporting that thesis, and then somehow you're trying to bring it back. Um, Now, anyone can talk for 1 minute on different topics, and that includes all of you here. So when you're thinking of a theme, you can basically develop how you feel about that theme, and then you can start adding to it. Now, the one thing that um, I would say that on that structure makes life very easy for me, but I also start adding some constraints when I'm still feeling resistance. So I can sit down and think about something um, that might feel a little heavy emotionally, and I'm not even going to get to the fact that sometimes it's not even the resistance of writing a piece, but the resistance of confronting a difficult event from your past. So then, once I have the structure, I create constraints that I create constraints from software. So there's a couple of different applications that you can download to your phone or to your computer, and they're called, I don't know that what's the name for the actual application, but the different names are Danger Notes, Squibbler, Flow, Call of Writing. And the idea behind that is that you give yourself a time limit and you launch the application by you start your writing your first letter, and then you have to keep writing. And if you stop writing at any point, it will delete everything. Now, this might sound a little silly because you think that the resistance is stronger than that, but really, just starting with 5 minutes, you'll find out that you just start getting into the flow of writing. Um, I often find that for an essay, two of these sessions, two of these 5 minute time limits to keep on writing will be enough for actually overcome the resistance for that piece. So then I won't have to do it anymore. So I'll do 2 cycles of 5 minutes and then I'll move on, and I can just visualize where the piece is going by just writing for 10 minutes. The other applications that I would suggest, if especially if you're beginning to write first person essays, think of stories that you tell to people. What are some of the things that have happened to you that somehow managed to make them into regular conversation, and then actually use a press record an audio recorder. And in that front, there are two applications that I have used. um, just press record is one of them, and the other one is Temi. And if you speak English and English is your first language, that's great because the applications tend to be better at transcribing. If you are like me and English is your second language, then it becomes a little bit messier. Like you have to really go through the transcript to figure out what you were trying to say. The good news is that the spot or that word that you're not understanding, you can actually click on it and it will tell you uh, what you were saying. So it will pick up the audio and it will play the audio forward. Um, yes. So going back to the structure, um, the, the reason I really like this structure is because I don't even think of the 6 or 7 things that I listed, but I think, what is my attention getter, and what are 3 things that I can say about this. So with that being said, I have 2 stories that I loosely have thought about, but I haven't written them. And maybe you guys can tell me which one I should do. Hey, Deborah. Let's see. Let's see if you guys can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I have a story about how in my teenage years I wasn't really able to get a lot of good sleep because I have a lot of obsessive thoughts. And then I have a story about a conversation, one of a very significant conversation I had right before moving to the United States. Um, I don't know if anybody has a preference, one or two. They're both very emotional, significant for me. And that's probably one of the reasons why I haven't really finished them. One or two, anybody? Basic, there we go. Okay, conversation. Perfect. Write them both. Okay, if I have time, I'll definitely try to write them both. Um, let's see. Let's see here. I'm gonna share my screen. They're good, Deborah, right? Okay. Well, you know what? This seems like it's gonna be too much, so let's just go right into it. I'll just type it as message. Okay, so moving to the United States. Okay, so moving to the United States, I was 21, but if you've read any of my essays, I typically never start with what I'm trying to say, and that is something that if you talk to me, right, that's one of the things that I have learned in storytelling too. Uh, and if you have ever thought about going out and performing your stories, to find a moth in your area or find your local story slam is something that I really I cannot say how great it is because you start developing a sense for your own voice, and that sense is informing your writing. Yeah, they're great. I mean, and one of the things is that as you're practicing and you're starting to listening to your stories, two things happen. Um, you start writing, or you start getting rid of writing that doesn't sound genuine. Like you'll find yourself saying, nobody talks like that, right? So but once you say it, and I know that some people actually read their pieces out loud because then they can also hear it. But having to perform a story and starting to saying things will give you a sense of how you talk, how you speak, and then infusing that into your writing to the point that once you sit down to write, that's the way that you will write moving forward. So then, okay, moving to the States. So then the attention getter or icebreaker is going to be a story. Okay, my dad eating Zaragozas. Okay, so Zaragozas are red beans, and in Colombia, um, when I was growing up, the bean industry didn't have it together, right? So for some reason, they didn't clean the beans good enough. So then it was up to you to do a really good job cleaning them, and and um, and a lot of times you would find yourself actually chewing on little pieces of rock. And um, there's a story about my dad. I'm still living with them. I'm 8 years old, and we're at the kitchen table, and he's chewing on these red beans, and then he bites on one rock. Yes. So then, my dad was a very passionate man, uh, which is another word for angry. He was like he had very impulsive, very angry. So he picks up that rock and he chucks it to the side, frustrated. And the meal goes on, and he's 10 minutes later he's chewing on yet another rock. So he grabs that rock and he chucks it across the kitchen. 2 or 3 seconds pass, and then he realized that he did not chuck a rock, but he actually threw away a mauler. So um, That story by itself, I find funny myself, and I can go back and play a little bit with the structure of it to make sure that it's also, when it's being delivered, it will maybe make some people laugh too. But I want to start there because I want to show this side of my dad, where he is like this very um, uh, impulsive man. And then I want to move on to my second part, which is when my parents divorced. I was doing lines with my dad at night, and I was doing them for school. And I was very angry that they had divorced, and he could see that from the way I was holding my pen and I was doing my lines, and I was putting extra pressure on the writing. And my dad actually told me, it's okay to die. It's okay not to die. Sorry, it is okay to die. I mean, we all do it, but he said it's okay to cry. And at that moment, obviously, still very young, still a lot of young emotions. I started crying, and I think that was one of the best gift my dad ever gave me. Not that he made me cry, but that he allowed me as a man to have emotions, and it also colors the filter in which I see him, and also something that I value in literature, which is this idea of when we're running into people that we think have broke us or damaged us, but they're also so human, and maybe you appreciate that. But I personally feel that when you are not showing the different sides of people, then you have something that is very flat, and you as the protagonist only run into people that hate you and they're out to get you without really showing their humanity. Okay, now so we have two pieces. So we have paragraph two is my dad telling me to cry. Okay, so this is really what the meat of this essay will be about, and is you can guess from those two examples that my relationship with my dad was complicated, and the third example um, is my conversation with my dad right before coming to the United States. Um, he had been struggling with his own things. So he had been moving a lot in Colombia, but he was always trying to make it back to the city where my sister and I lived. The final year when my dad made it back to that city was the year that my sister and I decided to move to the United States. And one of the most difficult conversations I had with him was him saying, um, so it's him saying, you know, crying about us leaving, but also saying, burn your ships. And this is something that he then said that really he wished he would have done, because if he would have never come back to the United States, he felt that he would have still remained married to my mom. But it's one of the things that I always brought with me. And then um, the final piece on that, the final story is that when I actually moved to the United States, I I spent about 2 hours crying, and it wasn't just because I was going to Phoenix, which is traditionally very difficult for for Hispanics, or at least for me, to be in. Not the city in itself; the city is awesome, but the airport is actually, their TSA department is really difficult. And so then I'll probably stop there. So those are like the three events that will put the whole story together. Um, you know, that is just um, broad strokes on the story. Then I would actually go back and try to find what other themes can I highlight to talk about a little bit more about this decision to come to the United States. I would develop obviously that conversation with my dad. I would actually trying to highlight as well. At first, you have that transition that he goes from angry to being somebody who is somewhat trouble to actually somebody who does his best to give me advice that could mean that I won't see him as much because it would mean that I would find success or find stability in the United States. I have in 20 years I've never actually been back to Colombia, and in all that time I've actually seen my dad only once. So it is one of those things that might make it into a monologue. It's a story that I found deeply personal, and maybe some of you will be motivated to actually talk about some of these things that are very personal. Now, that is a lot. That is a lot of disclosure. I don't typically go around having conversations, even though I'm a very social person. I will go have a conversation with a clerk at a store. I'm not going to tell them that story because it is what is called unearned disclosure. It will freak them out. They will think I'm weird. But that is some first person essays is one of those places where that doesn't necessarily apply, and that kind of disinhibition will help your stories not be generic. If you have stories that are just, I can just talk in more generic terms about how hard it was to move to the United States, but I'm actually bringing you uh, on this trip to the relationship with my father. I have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to talk quickly about tone, and then we're going to talk about where to take this kind of essays. So tone is something that I I think that should reflect who you are as a person. So when I go back, if you ever have a conversation with me, you know that I'm always trying to crack jokes, make light of dark topics, things that seem a little bit bleak. So I'm always going to be fine tuning for that. If something feels too heavy, if something feels like I haven't quite resolved it myself, I might keep that to myself. I might erase it from a draft. Um, and if you're trying to submit this as a prompt, then you're gonna try to come back and highlight that prompt itself. Um, I take this kind of essays primarily to Scribe, to Thomas Godot, who first came up with the idea of actually having this keynote presentation. And the reason is simple. I can take this to a humorous publication, maybe, um, but I like the idea of having. Um, Yes, absolutely, and I think like that is one of my self-shielding mechanisms. I also think that humor in itself is an assertion of control. You don't let yourself be brought down by how hard things get, which is something that I learned in Colombia. I grew up in Colombia in the 90s, where the 80s and 90s, where the violence was at its height, and people were some of the happiest people in the world. Um, for the longest time, they were coming at top three with Denmark and I think at the time it was Vietnam. But I take them to Scribe or publications similar to Scribe because in Scribe you can get personal essays that are going to have all variety of tones. And that is the difference between comedy open mics and actually going to a story slam. In a comedy open mic, you tend to have only jokes, and those can be reduced to, you have a punchline and you have a setup and you have a punchline, and then you're trying to reduce as much of the description as you can and trying to get fast to the joke. Where in a story slam, you actually can wander a little bit. You enjoy some of the poetic language that people bring, and you can have all sorts of tones. You can have somebody that is bringing a story that is truly tragic, heart wrenching, and then you have somebody who has something a little bit more fluffy, a little bit more light, and more humorous. Um, and then I'm going to stop right there. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. My top tips for turning an anecdote into a story. It's I think the very first thing is that you put it down in writing. So So you put it down in writing, and you put it. That's why you use the structure, and that's why you use the constraints. Because when you have too much into an anecdote, something that is like very rich, the first thing you have to do is make sure that you're paring it down, and it also helps to start with the point of that paragraph, and then write for 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then stop, and then see where that's going. So the very first thing will be just structure, just so you can know that you can start somewhere and you're going to stop some other place. Thank you, Donna. Let's see. How do you make money with your stories? When I tried to like do this, there was very little spaces for descriptions, and actually I said the full title was how to turn trauma into stories for loads of fun, very little money, and almost no fame. So I have a little bit of, um, you know, I don't know how the algorithm works. I know that I get my work published in newspapers. I'm always trying to find ways to get it out there, um, but I'm still trying to figure that one out. A poet who has award-winning poetry that has also been plagiarized too. How should she go about getting edited and published? In terms of getting edit, I don't know. So the first thing will be to find a literary agent, and I think Medium actually has a lot of good content on finding agents, getting published. Um, Verillo is the last name. I forgot her first name. She has a publication. Uh, Curiosity Never Killed a Cat, and she's constantly publishing um, posts with where people are looking for work for paid gigs and non-paid. And also there is Chris Sowers from Tell Your Story does the same thing. So those are good places to start getting your work published. There you go. Anthony says that it starts paying off after a little bit. What kind of places do stories land? Where do you find them? You can go to the Moth, and this is for the people in the United States. You can go to the Moth and you can find if they have something near you. Something else you can do is actually start one of your own if you live in a small uh, city. And also you can always, if yours are a little bit humorous, you can always end up going to a comedy open mic, and or you can talk to the moderator and see if they will be open to something like that. And if they're not, maybe talk to a moderator of a poetry slam or a poetry meeting. My pleasure, Wendy. Yes. I wouldn't. I know there's a lot of people that talk about this, but I don't know how to make more out of Medium. And yeah, well, I think those are the questions. Um, Thank you everyone for joining me. And I'll probably with what it was done today, I'll probably write this essay next, and you can actually see um, how the actual skeleton of the draft went from here to a finished essay. And hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all.